Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Chris Sheng, and today we have Milena Berry, who is the co-founder and CEO of PowerToFly. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course, tell us a little bit about PowerToFly. I read a little bit about it, but would love to hear it from your voice and what it is that you guys do.
Yeah, PowerToFly is really a great platform that's helping companies that are committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging connect with underrepresented talent. And on the flip side, it helps underrepresented talent to find companies that really care about the type of workforces that they're building and are really thoughtful and methodical about their inclusivity practices. We've been at it for about 10 years. We've had massive impact, worked with some of the world's biggest brands, some of the world's smallest brands. So definitely success stories from all sizes of companies out there.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a job placement marketplace, but with a focus on DEI.
Absolutely, and underrepresented talent.
Got it.
Yep.
Got it. Very cool. Um, Before we jump into that and just kind of you've been seeing um, around how that the workforce has evolved in the past few years and then leading up to today, and then maybe perhaps some of the challenges or what you're seeing is maybe some of the advantages that's happening in the next few years to come. You do have like a background in engineering. You've been a former CTO. Would love to kind of get an understanding around your previous like chapters of your work history and the different evolutions of that, right? And like how you grew into these different roles and then ultimately how you ended up starting PowerToFly and what was the initial interest around that and becoming an entrepreneur and founder, which obviously takes on not just the core competencies of what you've learned, but like a whole different, I feel like, skill set in terms of like wearing a lot of different hats to kind of stand up a business. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about, where things started for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an immigrant in the US. I'm originally from Bulgaria, and I arrived in New York City with a couple of bags, in September 2001, actually a few days before September 11th, which
Wow.
was a very intense time period to be in New York City. I came here to attend a graduate school at New York University. I went to an amazing program called the Interactive Telecommunications Program. It sounds like a name from the 1970s because it is. It actually is very close to what the MIT Media Lab does in terms of really working on the intersection of arts and technology and kind of at the intersection of what's really the most innovative tech out there and how do we apply it to solving business problems. So I really arrived in the US with a very big desire and hunger to participate in the innovation technology, to participate in magic that at the time Silicon Valley was creating, but then it was kind of a budding industry in Silicon Alley in New York City. And that's where I stayed. And one thing led to another. And here I am, being a part of that innovation economy that I so wanted to be a part of. After graduating from grad school, I couldn't get any job. I think that's a story that a lot of folks coming out of fancy schools experience, but I was not, shy to pick up anything that came my way. And actually, my first job after my fancy grad school was of a manual QA tester
Hmm.
an application that was on all the old school phones. I'm dating myself, but literally, they had built an application basically on top of an old school phone before smartphones that was helping the HVAC industry, fulfill work orders. And so I was doing manual testing. One thing led to another. I switched roles, went for another company that was in the edtech space. And then eventually I had a chance to participate in the very, very early team at a nonprofit that was starting around 2007 named avaz.org. And one thing led to another. I helped them create an international team, became their CTO, and stayed there for 7 years and oversaw the evolution of their tech platform from pretty much 1 million to maybe 45 million members worldwide. And then 10 years later sat on their board, and now I'm sitting on their board. So things are definitely coming full circle. Part of my experience as a CTO was very much understanding that global teams are very productive and a way to work around the clock and to also be cost efficient, but also to kind of bring this diversity of perspective. And especially if you're building a global problem, you really want to have a global team solving that problem. Um, but I also realized that the gender parity on my team had really a lot to be desired from. And there was the female leader with the only females on my team of, I don't know, 15 folks was one designer and one QA person, right? And so I firsthand experienced that problem of how hard it is to find female engineers. And that kind of became the premise of PowerToFly. And it was finally time for me to spread my wings and start something new. And I'll spare you the long part of the story, but basically it was a lot of it was me reflecting back on the people who had invested in me and how it was really time for me to start giving back and to kind of use the rest of my career um, to really help others more than helping myself. Um, and so I really wanted to focus on solving a problem for the world that had a huge mission. And in the very first iteration of Power to Fly, that was connecting women to job opportunities in the innovation economy. We've since then evolved that vision, and I'm happy to tell you more about it later.
Interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like you definitely went through a few different iterations and chapters before it seems like sell it seems like where you really kind of like got your wings was like at Avaz and like working with that organization growing from 1 million members to 40 some million members as you mentioned, and then being there and then now being on the board. um that being said, I'd be curious as to, obviously you've spoken to the passion for why you started Power to Fly and you were firsthand experiencing that as a CTO, the pain point of it. But then to shoulder the responsibility of going out and solving for, this kind of like big problem is a completely different undertaking. What kind of gave you the confidence to be the one to do that? Um, you know, was it that much of like, I guess, a commitment to just that mission and that vision, and you felt like you just were so compelled and obsessed to be the person to solve for it? Or were there other factors involved, in terms of like bringing on the right kind of co-founder, right kind of partnerships, that gave you the confidence to make that leap?
I mean, obviously, this is a very complex process, and it's not like one day I woke up and, I mean, there was a little bit like that because I was sitting there thinking, what am I going to do with my life after Vaz? I want to do something of a meaning. And it was interesting that right before I figured out it was time for me to leave Avaz, the founder of the interactive telecommunications program, the grad school I attended at NYU, passed away that summer. And at the age of 80 something, the time had come, but I could not attend to her wake because I was abroad during that time. But I kind of spent a bunch of time reading excessively articles about her life and how she was actually never had been a teacher or an educator. And there she was, she created something really amazing. And I read a bunch of her interviews, and she's like, well, when you're passionate about something, you just put one foot in front of the other. So I guess I
It's cool.
believed in myself just from like seeing how she figured out something she had nothing, she knew nothing about, just from kind of being passionate and kind of trying to figure a problem step by step. Um, at the same time, I should be very honest and say that I kind of had the privilege to not be like, to be able to not work for just a little bit and to invest a little bit of our personal money into the very beginning of the business and before we kind of raised investor capital to run the business. And so I definitely want to recognize that not everybody's in that position. And then I had just been very, very lucky at that time of my life to be able to afford this. Not for long, but for the very critical first stages of the business, I was able to afford it. I then very much understood that I couldn't do it by myself. As delusional as I was and as inspired as I was, I also knew that I couldn't do it alone. And I've learned so much from my wife, who had started her CEO journey 2 years earlier and gone through a fundraising process and kind of was building something of herself. We're actually two entrepreneurs in a household, two CEOs. So it's a fun dynamic. We can help each other a lot. But I also knew that I have my strengths and I also have my weaknesses. And a lot of my weaknesses were around marketing and communication and kind of like I not having the network to get in touch with the right investors, the right places. And so I set out to find a co-founder. And basically that was and to kind of like think about the product market fit. So I went to a bunch of conferences and I would present to everybody the idea. And the first person who told the idea, I said, well, Odesk, right? And Odesk is what eventually became Upwork, for those of you familiar with the space. And so let's say it's Upwork now so that people can understand me. And say like, well, I'm building Upwork, but for vetted female, but for women. And everyone's like, well, but Upwork kind of sucks. The quality is bad. I don't really get it. Like, I don't really get it. And the second person I was pitching the idea, I said, I'm building Upwork, but for vetted female tech talent. They're like, ooh, vetted. That sounds interesting. Now I can get on board with that. I need somebody to vet the tech talent for me. And so I was kind of iterating on the idea in real time in kind of conversations with people. I basically met with anybody who would meet with me for my network and to kind of tell them about the idea, see if they have any connections to possible revenue and customers. And as part of that process, received I received a card in the mail. And if you know me, you know that I open my mail every 6 months at most. So it was kind of a very funny timing that I actually decided to open my mail at that time of life, at that time, which was, around Christmas. And I got a birth announcement of a woman named Catherine Zaleski, who my wife had worked with previously at her company. And she was announcing the birth of her daughter. I was like, oh, I haven't talked to you for a while. Let's go for coffee. And what was different about that meeting is that everybody else who I was meeting to, network and share my idea with was kind of politely nodding their head, slightly not understanding, kind of trying to be nice to me, but just not really fully getting it. And when I shared the idea with Catherine, was like, but this is my problem. You're talking about female engineers, but this is the same problem about me. I'm a female in the publishing and news, like in the digital media. And so she just like wouldn't stop talking for the rest of the conversation. And I went home and I was like, I think I found my co-founder. Let's try this out. And then it was like a moment of iteration and working on decks together and figuring out, can we actually do this together? And then through that process, we got to the right investor. She went to quit her job and her boss said, I'll invest. And that kind of began the fundraising process. And now we're there, having raised up to Series B, having raised $35 million for PowerToFly. And there's not very many women or even fully female teams who have reached that milestone. So I'm super proud of us and where we've gotten 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, amazing feat. Would love to kind of dive into like what those first few maybe like years look like, right? Because you mentioned, I think you did it the right way in the sense of like, solidifying the idea before perhaps investing a ton of time and resources into producing the solution, right? And so but when it came time to kind of like build out the platform, what was that like? I mean, was that more second nature to you, or was that something that was, um, that had to go down its own rabbit hole of like usability testing and talking to more potential, customers slash like users of it, from an employee perspective, to work out the kinks of it to, yeah, to really kind of like get the most value to your customers.
Well, the funny thing is that we've really just kept adding different solutions and products to our platform over the years. So again, the very first iteration of PowerToFly was actually built on top of an amazing content management system called Rebel Mouse,
Yeah.
which was amazing for us because literally without building a platform and a website and the very heavy tech investment that's needed to architect it the right way and provision the servers and the DevOps and the front end developers and the full stack developers and the back end architect, blah, blah, blah. That ended up costing a lot. And thank God we had raised by that, our first seed investment was 1 million so that we can pay for that initial tech team primarily. But before that, so like we got together in February, Catherine and I, and we launched in August.
Okay.
And from February to August, we basically ran the site on a blog software, right? And all we could do is basically she would write up every profile and she would tell the story of that woman that was, I don't know, one of them was in Ukraine and the other one was in Argentina and the third one was in Patagonia. And so like there was always a story. And that was again like a very super low tech way to pilot the idea and to see
Mhm.
like are people interested. And then when we saw that actually we're getting revenue, people are love to get connected to this talent. We're taking our cut from the relationship and etc. And then we had also raised the amount of funding. Then we said, all right, let's build it at a platform where anybody can sign up and and clients can find those, get logins and look at the profiles and kind of create the marketplace um, type technology. And then again, that was not even the end of our journey because this was just year one. In year two, then we started building a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of other hiring solutions, and then employer branding solution came a couple years later. Now we also offer upskilling content and training content modules. So again, we set out to become really the leader in the place, and that meant that we wanted to have a comprehensive set of features. But again, that took capital and that took time and yeah, capital and time and a whole lot of sweat, blood and tears and love, you know.
Absolutely. Not bad for an immigrant coming in with just a right before September 11th and a couple of bags and going through that whole thing. Would love to kind of better understand, with the, with where you are, the space that you guys play in, specifically like talent in the DEI space and for women. Has that been something that you feel like is you've been around for 10 years. What has been kind of like the response to that in terms of like the demand for the talent, right? Have you seen the ebbs and flows of it? Have you seen it like I also think like some of these things is also timing, right? So being able to build things at the right time and when markets are ready for certain things. Have you seen um have you seen that fluctuate at all? And also like the types of talent that people are actively hiring against, like um, whether it is from a specific part of the world or a specific or a specific type of person of a specific background. Have you seen things like shift, and how has that changed, I guess, over the years? And just kind of curious as to like why you think some of these things might have changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting timing to ask me that question when every morning I wake up to another article attacking DEI efforts at corporations. And I don't know, it seems to be some sort of political campaign prior to the elections to me, because
Sure.
every time I talk to our business leaders and buyers, they say, like, no, we're as committed as ever. And then, the news just keeps spewing, clickbait on the topic. But to answer your question specifically, there's definitely a shift in that space, and I'll try to give you the trajectory over the 10 years. So when
Yeah.
we first started, definitely everybody was talking about the gender inequality and the place of women in the workplace. And so we, as two working mothers, this is the first solution that we set out to build. And then a few years in, when we realized that the types of solutions that we were putting to the place, which have to do with showing women that they belong before asking them to apply, with inspiring them with stories of other women in organizations that are successful in the companies that they might be interested in, with opening the doors and actually providing access between the talent side to the companies, because usually talent gets lost in the black hole of the application process, I call it. We figure that the solutions that we brought forward to the market are not just um, applicable to women, but they're actually applicable to all underrepresented talent. And so we really expanded our focus. And today we do not only serve women, I want to be very clear about it. We also help companies find underrepresented talent of different ethnic backgrounds, of different races, anywhere on the LGBTQI plus spectrum. And those are our like three largest underrepresented group, right? Like females and those who identify as females, the pride group, and then the different ethnicities. And then, of course, we also have budding communities on neurodiversity, disabilities, and veterans, but those are, I would say, a little bit less built out. Um, and what was interesting is that not a few years after all the companies in the Bay Area had declared that women are a top priority for them, they also said now top priority is Black folks and Latin engineers. We've got the women thing done, and don't worry about it anymore. They didn't get it done. No way they got it done. They
Yeah.
just like, shifted to the new candy in front of them. So I definitely think that a lot more efforts are needed to get to the world we all want to have. Um, and then what's happened, obviously, in 2020 with George Floyd's murder, we saw a lot of commitments from corporations on the topic. And now we're all watching them walk back those commitments in 2024, 4 years later. So it's certainly a very, very interesting time in the industry. And the way I think about it is that at the end of the day, our work was always about getting the best person in the job
Mm,
and about eliminating the barriers that people had in finding those best people for the job because they were basically getting impaired with their biases, right?
mm,
Biases in the hiring process, biases in where they advertise their jobs, biases in knowing how to talk to that audience, etc. And so it is equally more important, just like with ever, to not hire somebody based on their identity and based on their demographic. The business should always find the best person for the job. It's just that you need to be wider in your scope of who you consider to be the best person for the job and to challenge your unconscious biases on it and to spread your wings and to make your funnel a bit bigger. The other thing that's changing right now in the industry is we're finding the office of the DEI officer dismantled, the chief
mm,
diversity officer dismantled. To be honest, they never had any power. They never had any budget.
mhm,
They were very much a very kind of representative role without true power and without true budget. And so I do not think that that is necessarily a bad trend. I think what is important to not get forgotten while you dismantle the chief diversity officer's office is that you need to educate your functional leaders to have that skill set themselves on how to be an inclusive leader, on how to pick up all that work. Because the truth is, every time a company did great on all of these initiatives, which I let me call them not DEI initiatives, they're people initiatives. At the
yep,
end of the day, people are your biggest resource. They're your biggest spend on your P&L. Your comp tab is way bigger than the tools tab, always, right? And so you got to invest in your people, regardless of what they look like. You're investing in your people, you're investing in your workforce. And every leader's responsibility, whether you are the CFO, the CRO, the CTO, the CIO, the CEO, whatever C-level person, they need to be educated on how to be better people managers, period, and on how to run better people teams. And so this DEI skill set, which was the job of a segmented person called the chief diversity officer, really needs to be now become a core strength to every other C leader, and not just C leader, but also middle managers underneath them, right? So this is how I'm seeing some things shift in terms of importance and power, and kind of how the budgets are going to get allocated in the other part of the org. But I actually welcome this because at the end of the day, it's about driving business results. Um, it's not about the demographics.
yeah. I mean, that's such an interesting perspective that I don't think I've ever heard explained before, but like in the as eloquently as you just kind of put it, but I feel like uh yeah, definitely like we all have personal biases that are, whether we want to admit it or not, that's subconscious or conscious to us, that's ingrained to you from wherever you come from and however you were raised and where you were born and all that. And that can be, no matter how open-minded we think we are individually, sometimes we're not fully aware of what those biases might even look like or exist. And I think that and I think, like, you have the C-suite leaders that are looking to, to optimize for performance or optimize the business for efficiencies, but those biases could be potentially getting in the way, and it's like educating them to just being aware enough that there's a possibility that that exists there, and it is limiting the outcomes for you. And again, not by, it's not even like we're going to like narrow down on a specific segment of the demographic. It's just about the fact that whatever your experiences are might impact the way that you look at the full scope of talent. And that's such an interesting, yeah, way to kind of look at it. I'm curious, as I know we're up on time here, but just kind of on the last question is, how are you noticing I mean, are there tools in play right now to educate those types of decision makers, the C-suite, the executives that are making those hiring decisions? Um, how, yeah, what's out there right now to inform them in the way that you kind of just informed me, which is like, for you to have the best possible outcome, you have to be aware of the fact that you might have subconscious biases that's prohibiting you from evaluating the full scope of talent. What are you, what's out there to help educate the wider population around that potential issue?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to just pitch myself here, but I
Yes,
am
do
going
it.
to.
Do it.
PowerToFly has a great learning product called Power Up, and it's geared exactly at that. It's priced at a price point
Awesome.
that literally every single leader and their whole workforce can actually get on it if needed. But it's meant exactly to solve this pain point of like again, the people skill set is not just an HR person's responsibility, it's every manager's responsibility, especially with the lens of inclusivity and building high performing teams. So very happy to tell you more if you get in touch with us on powertofly.com, or I'm on LinkedIn, Milena Berry. Ping me, personally. I'm very happy to talk to you more about this. We also host a very exuberant number of events on PowerToFly, both for the candidate side and kind of upskilling and learning how to network and how to land the best job at an employer that cares, and also from a professional who wants to up their game on find connect with the right talent, but also understand the newest and the best trends on DEI. So very much check out our events, and that's a great first starting point. In the process of engaging with our brand, we have a lot of partners that are going to come your way. So I'll then, that probably one thing's going to lead to another, and you'll be able to get other resources that way as well.
Very cool. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time today, sharing your story, but more importantly, sharing your mission with Power to Fly. Congratulations on the success so far. Uh, I mean, just very impressed by the level of accomplishment that you've gotten to from your humble beginnings, perhaps of like coming into this country as an immigrant and then being able to really kind of push the boundaries and shapeshift the world a little bit. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris, and helping tell this story. I really appreciate you.
Absolutely.